Welcome back, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me. Thank you for being here. Please make sure that you are subscribed to Solando Opinion on YouTube and follow us on social media for more exclusive content. I would absolutely love to see you there. Links are in the video description below to get connected. For months, the Department of Justice promised they would protect the identities of Jeffrey Epstein's victims. They said they had hundreds of reviewers carefully going through millions of documents to make sure victim names were redacted. They missed their December 19th deadline. Then they said they needed more time because victim protection was so important. And then on Friday, January 30th, 2026, they released 3 million pages, and it was a disaster. According to attorneys representing more than 300 Epstein survivors, the DOJ exposed the names or personal information of nearly 100 individual survivors. These are not people who chose to come forward publicly. These are victims whose identities were supposed to be protected by law, and now their lives have been turned upside down. Brittany Henderson and Brad Edwards, the attorneys representing these victims, filed an emergency motion on Sunday with federal judges Richard Berman and Paul Engelmeyer. They asked the judges to immediately order the DOJ to take down the entire Epstein Files website, and in that motion, they wrote something chilling. They said this is, quote, "the single most egregious violation of victim privacy in one day in United States history." Let me give you some specifics. The Wall Street Journal reviewed the files and found that at least 43 victims' full names were exposed. More than 24 of those victims were minors when they were abused. Some names appeared over 100 times in the documents. Home addresses were visible in keyword searches. Banking information was left unredacted. The New York Times found dozens of uncensored nude photographs of young people with their faces clearly visible. The faces of alleged underage victims appeared on organizational charts created by FBI investigators. One victim had her private banking information exposed in 51 separate entries. She's now trying to shut down her credit cards and accounts because she's receiving death threats. And here's what makes this even worse. A simple name search would have prevented this. The database is searchable. If the DOJ had run basic searches for known victim names before releasing the files, they would have caught these errors. But they didn't. Or they did, and they didn't care. Because when you look at how inconsistent the redactions are, it's hard to believe this was just incompetence. Names were redacted in one version of a document, but left completely exposed in another version of the exact same document. Some redactions were so poorly done that you could simply double-click on the black bar and reveal the text underneath. Other names were crossed out, but not fully blackened, so they were still visible. Spencer Kuvin, an attorney representing multiple Epstein survivors, told CBS News that 2 of his clients were clearly identified in the release. He said, and I quote, "The Department of Justice doesn't care about victims one bit. All they were doing was trying to make sure that these very powerful people were redacted from the files, and they did not care about the victims at all." Think about that. The DOJ spent months delaying the release. They said they needed time to protect victims, and then when they finally released the files, they exposed victim names while carefully protecting the names of powerful people who might have been involved. And victims are noticing this pattern. Michelle Licata-Bensky, who was a teenage ballerina when Epstein abused her 2 decades ago, told NBC News that at first she thought it was carelessness. Then she thought it was incompetence. But now she says, quote, "It feels a bit deliberate. It feels like a bit of an attack on survivors." She's not alone in that feeling. 8 women who identify as Epstein victims added comments to the lawyer's letter to Judge Berman. One wrote that the record's release was life-threatening. Another said she had gotten death threats. Now let's talk about what the DOJ says happened. On Monday, February 2nd, the DOJ filed a letter with the federal judges saying they had taken down several thousand documents and media that may have inadvertently included victim-identifying information. They blamed it on, quote, "technical or human error." Jay Clayton, the U.S. attorney who signed the letter, said the department worked all weekend to identify and remove problematic documents. He said they have teams of personnel monitoring requests from victims and their lawyers. And he said the first 24 hours of engagement led to significant enhancements to their processes. But here's the problem. It's too late. Those documents were online for days. Thousands of people downloaded them. Journalists, researchers, conspiracy theorists, random internet users, everyone had access. The files are now circulating on forums, social media, and file-sharing sites. You can't put that genie back in the bottle. The harm is done, and it's irreversible. The attorneys for the victims wrote in their letter to the judges, quote, There is no conceivable degree of institutional incompetence sufficient to explain the scale, consistency, and persistence of the failures that occurred, particularly where the sole task ordered by the court and repeatedly emphasized by DOJ was simple: redact known victim names before publication. They also noted that before this release, the DOJ had already failed to properly redact victim information in the first two batches of files released in December and January. Victims had been assured there would be no repeat of those privacy violations. That expectation was shattered. And it's not just victim names. The DOJ also exposed other sensitive information. One email showed Jeffrey Epstein's entire credit card number, expiration date, and security code. An interview transcript from the investigation into Epstein's suicide included a jail worker's full social security number and date of birth. Some email addresses were visible under thin crossouts. At an unrelated sex trafficking trial in New York on Monday, lawyers for two high-end real estate brokers asked for a mistrial because their clients' names had appeared in some of the Epstein documents, falsely suggesting an association with Epstein. Now let's talk about what's actually in these files. Because despite the massive privacy violations, there is some important information. The files include more than 3 million pages of documents, 180,000 images, and 2,000 videos. They include FBI records, court documents, emails, financial records, and investigative files. And they reveal a lot about Epstein's network and how he operated. There are emails between Epstein and prominent figures like Elon Musk, Bill Gates, and Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick. There are calendar entries showing planned visits to Epstein's private island. There's an email from 2009 mentioning that Bill Clinton and Jeff Bezos attended an after-party at Ghislaine Maxwell's house. There are also documents showing that Epstein updated his will and trust more than 24 times over many years. In a 2012 version of his trust, Jean-Luc Brunel, a modeling scout and close associate, is listed as receiving as much as $5 million. Brunel was arrested in 2020 by French authorities on charges of rape of minors and trafficking. He died in prison in 2022. The files also reveal Epstein's connections to Interlochen Center for the Arts, a prestigious music camp in Michigan. Records show Epstein donated close to $400,000 to the center from 1990 to 2003. During Ghislaine Maxwell's criminal trial, a woman testified that she met Epstein and Maxwell at Interlochen when she was a girl in the early 1990s. Survivors have alleged that Epstein and Maxwell used the campus as a hunting ground. There's also a draft 2007 federal indictment against Epstein and 3 of his assistants that was never pursued. The FBI began investigating Epstein in July 2006 after multiple underage girls told police and the FBI that they had been paid to give Epstein sexualized massages. Agents expected him to be indicted in May 2007, but instead, U.S. Attorney Alexander Acosta signed off on a deal that allowed Epstein to avoid federal prosecution. Epstein pleaded guilty to a state charge of soliciting prostitution from someone under 18 and received an 18-month jail sentence. That sweetheart deal is one of the biggest scandals in this entire case. And here's something else that's interesting. The files include thousands of mentions of President Trump. Many of them are news clippings. But there are also lists and summaries of unsubstantiated claims made against him by individuals alleging wrongdoing, including graphic depictions of alleged sexual abuse. Some of those complaints date back to the 1990s. Others are more recent. Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche said on Friday that the DOJ did not protect President Trump or anyone else. He said there's no hidden tranche of documents about men they're covering up. But when you look at how carefully powerful people's names were redacted while victim names were left exposed, that claim rings hollow. The DOJ has also withheld approximately 200,000 pages under various legal privileges, including attorney-client privilege, and they withheld material depicting child sexual abuse. So out of 6 million pages they identified as potentially relevant, they've released about 3.5 million. That means roughly 2.5 million pages are still not public. Congressman Ro Khanna, one of the authors of the Epstein Files Transparency Act, said he has outstanding questions about why so many documents remain out of public view. He's looking for additional victim interview statements and documents from Epstein's computers. Now let's talk about what happens next. Judge Richard Berman, who presided over Epstein's sex trafficking case, has scheduled a conference for Wednesday to address the redaction failures. The DOJ says they've removed several thousand documents and are continuing to review the files. But as the lawyers for the victims pointed out, the harm is ongoing and irreversible. The files have been downloaded thousands of times. The victims' names are out there, and no amount of after-the-fact removal will change that. And here's the broader question. How did this happen? The DOJ had months to prepare. They delayed the release multiple times, saying they needed more time to protect victims. They had hundreds of reviewers going through the documents. They had searchable databases. They had lists of known victim names. And yet they still managed to expose nearly 100 victims. Was it incompetence? Was it deliberate? Or was it a combination of both? Because when you prioritize protecting powerful people while failing to protect vulnerable victims, that's a choice. That's not an accident. The lawyers for the victims wrote that their clients want this information for the world to see who was involved, but they also want to be protected. Some of these young girls do not wish to be identified. They have the right to privacy. They have the right to control their own stories. And the DOJ violated that right on a massive scale. One survivor told her lawyer that the release was life-threatening. Another is getting death threats. These are real people whose lives have been shattered all over again by a government agency that promised to protect them. And let's be clear about what this means. This isn't just about administrative failure. This is about trust. Victims came forward. They cooperated with investigators. They provided testimony. They were told their identities would be protected. And now they've been exposed to the world. Why would any victim ever trust the government again? Why would anyone ever come forward if this is how they're treated? The DOJ has not just failed these victims. They've undermined the entire process of seeking justice for sex trafficking survivors. Stay tuned. I will keep you updated as this story develops. Judge Berman's conference is scheduled for Wednesday, and we'll see what actions, if any, are taken. But for now, the damage is done. Nearly 100 victims have been exposed. Their names, their faces, their personal information are out there. And the Department of Justice, the very agency that was supposed to protect them, is responsible. Thank you very much for watching. I hope this video was informative. Please support the channel by liking, subscribing, and sharing this video with others who might find it interesting. I appreciate every single one of you who watches and engages with this content. I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Take care.